So excited to have both Rabbi David Jaffe here and Yehudah Webster from Kirva. Super, super awesome human beings that Uri Litzedek has been able to work with for such a long time. And in collaboration and in partnership with some deep work that our Jewish community has really benefited from. Rabbi David Jaffe is the founder of Kirva Institute and leads the Inside Out Wisdom and Action Project. He is the author of Changing the World from the Inside Out, a Jewish approach to personal and social change, which won the National Jewish Book Award for Contemporary Jewish Life. His teaching, writing, and organizing and consulting explore the intersection of moral and spiritual development and ethical action in the world. He teaches Mussar, which is phenomenal. You have to learn Mussar with Rabbi David. You have to. A Jewish spiritual wisdom widely throughout North America with the organizational and social change leaders, educators, and spiritual seekers of all ages. David was the founding board member of Avodah, the Jewish Service Corps, and helped start the Greater Boston Interfaith Organization, IAF, affiliate. He has matters in social work from Columbia University and a private rabbinic ordination from Israel. He is a senior faculty member with the Mussar Institute and a visiting research fellow at Boston University and adjunct faculty at the Hebrew College and Rabbinical School. Rabbi David serves on the board of directors of the Brockton Interfaith Community and lives in Sharon, Massachusetts with his partner Jeanette and two teenage boys. Super exact. Happy to also be joined by Yehudah Webster, who is a spiritual activist and a community organizer. Yehudah Webster works to animate, integrate anti-racist behaviors and culture in communities, supporting the collective organizing, advocacy, direct service efforts to dismantle racism systemically. As a program director and faculty at the Inside Out and Wisdom and Action Project, Yehudah equips communities with the daily concrete spiritual tools of Mussar to subvert racism within ourselves and others throughout facilitating workshops, consulting with other organizations, and building a community of anti-racism practice. He has presented a wide variety of settings, including staff developments for organizations, college campuses, communal institutions, and youth group programs. Yehudah is a graduate of Jews for Racial and Economic Justice Grace Polly's Organizing Fellowship, Ben Arc CELEP Leadership Program, and the Inside Out Wisdom and Action Projects of the Fellowship. I cannot highlight how amazing both of these two human beings are. I have the honor and pleasure to know them personally and spend time specifically like with Yehudah on racial justice work and know so much work that's just come together and phenomenal leadership that comes from Kirva. So super excited to hear. I know I even know that some of my friends from like Tzedek America have just been raging about how amazing their time with Yehudah was, and so many folks from my personal connections with like Jutina are telling me how much they're looking forward to the fellowships that Kirva is bringing. So thank you so much, both Rabbi David and Yehudah, for being here. Thank you.
Eddie, thanks so much. Love you and love Shmuley and everything you do at Oed Tzedek. Is your mom really a Kiddush Hashem, really sanctifying God's name and all the stuff you're doing. So I'll say a couple words, and then Yehudah wants to see if anything by introduction you want to say. So what we're going to do, and really good to see some friends here, and whoever's out in Facebook Live land. We want to share something that Yehudah developed, and then we worked on together at Kirva called a Balance of Care framework, and we want to do that with you today. And then for the first 20 minutes, probably half hour, we're together. And then for the rest of the time, really apply that framework to the tensions we're seeing around rising anti-Semitism in the country right now, and our in the United States in general, but I'd say also in our Jewish communities, ongoing commitment to the work of anti-racism, and how those can sometimes get pitted against each other. And we want to really talk with you, think together about how this framework can be a response to that. But before we jump in, Yehudah, I want to see if there's anything by way of introduction you'd like to say.
Just so grateful to be here. Thank you, Eddie, for the wonderful introduction. And I use he, him, his pronouns, and just thrilled to be able to bring this offering in this moment. And may it be for the liberation of our peoples, and to really leverage spiritual practice as well to move us in that direction.
Awesome. Thanks, Yehudah. And I would say I use he, him pronouns, and I'm coming in from Southeast Massachusetts, Massachusetts land, Wampanoag land here in near Boston. So just to start us off, what are people can think about, and we can really do this as a either a journal exercise or just a very short, like, minute contemplation of when you think about care. When you think about care, who is someone that comes to mind for you? Who is someone that really symbolizes that for you? It could be a relative, could be a friend, could be anyone. I want you to think about who that is, and then really imagine that person with their hand at your back, who represents care for you. And then let's take a minute just to think about that and really bring that image to mind. And then we ask you to write that person's name in the chat as a way to bring them into the space. And you'll understand why in a little bit, why we're doing that. Thanks, Yair, for putting that. If you have a name, you could put that in too. Thanks, Amani. Welcome Helena into the room. Thanks, Eddie. Welcome Christina into the room. Stella Taylor. Put my mother Liz Jaffe in. And anyone else, invite you to put names in the chat. Alrighty, we'll come back. You'll see. We're gonna thank you, Isaac, for bringing Judah into the room, and we'll come back in a little bit to why care is important. I just dropped in the chat also. Please open that up. This is our materials for today, and you'll see at the top. We're drawing this off of our program called Dismantling Racism from the Inside Out that Yehudah and I both created, that brings together anti-racism training with Mussar practice. We're not going to do all of that today together, but we want to give you the core framework for the program. And so if you can turn to page 2 and let me know if anyone doesn't have access to this and you need me to share screen. Eddie, is that a good idea with the Facebook Live to share screen? Okay, so I'll go ahead and do that. Okay, folks, see that? Great. So let's look at, if you have it and you want to use that page 2, something called the universe of obligation. And if you're not seeing it right now, just describe, there's a series of 4 concentric circles on the screen. And this is an exercise that we got from Facing History on Ourselves. The term universe of obligation was coined by Helen Fine, a sociologist. And what the circles are reflecting who you feel most responsible for, obligated to, for care. And what we want you to do on this is not be aspirational, but to really be realistic. If you think about your life as it is right now, today, towards whom and where are you expending the most care, concrete care? And that would go in the center. Who kind of gets the most hours or the most mental space or heart space, whatever. Then you have a next circle that's a little bit less, and then a little bit less, a little bit less. Okay, so let's take 2 minutes right now and do this exercise. And if you just have a piece of paper with you, you can make concentric circles and fill that out. And then this will be a part of our exercise. Okay, take 2 minutes. All right, it's okay to stop that for now, and we're going to come back. Put it aside for a sec. And oh, I see some of the messages here. That's fine. Just fine to listen in and just be with us for the conversation. It's totally good. The next piece we want to look at, and we're going to come back to that in a minute, is put this up again. On the next page, I want to look at two different sources regarding this idea of obligation. The first one's from Rambam Maimonides, writing in the about 800 years ago in the 12th century in Egypt, Spain and Egypt. And the second is a more contemporary source. Kind of volunteer, is anyone jump off mute here and read for us if you can. This is Maimonides' Laws of Gifts to the Poor, talking about how we make priorities when we have limited resources.
I can do that. I'm
Yeah,
going to
thanks,
read in English.
Yeah, English is good.
Okay. A poor person who is a relative takes precedence over anyone else. The poor of one's household takes precedence over the poor of one city. The poor of one city takes precedence over the poor of another city. As it is said in Deuteronomy 15:11, open your hand to the poor and needy kinsmen in your land. See Babylonian Talmud, Baba Metzia.
Okay,
71A.
thank you, Marty. So great. So we have this order of one's household first, then one's in the city, and then out. So it's like a concentric circle out as far as obligation. Monty, can you read the next one? Community obligation statement.
Sure. Community obligation statement. I love my daughters more than my nieces more than my cousins more than my neighbors. But that doesn't mean that we detest our neighbors.
Okay, another statement that's like kind of order of priorities that's here. That again, we did not write. It's more contemporary. So let's reflect on this. Look at your own. Go back to your own circles that you just did, and let's talk together about these questions here at the bottom. And again, I'll read them out for people who can't see it. So I think about in terms of the community obligation statement and the Mishnah Torah, Rambam and this other statement. What is their vision of community? How are they different? How are they similar? And do they line up with your own universe of obligation? What are some observations? I'd love to hear some observations folks may have about those and how they might line up with what you wrote. Any noticings?
For me, I noticed that like I put my family in my inner circle first, and I think we also see that we need to take the poor of one city's presidents first. So like I think about like like what takes priority first, and I looked at my circle, like automatically my family was first.
Thanks, Eddie. And that lines up, right? It lines up with what we see from both Rambam and the community obligation statement. Yeah, thanks. Any other noticings?
And they're really challenging to place myself, which I'm noticing doesn't come up in the community of obligation statement at all. And also seeing that they were interconnected. Like often when you said, think about the hours I spend in a day, there are certain things that I need to be able to do in order to provide things for other people, but also simultaneously, I have support from some of the people who are also in my circles. So I ended up with my child in the center because, when you said energy and time, right? The 24 hours of energy and I don't know, 10 hours, school's in session, so 10 hours of time. And then myself after, but also I have to do some things for myself in order to support her, and also my parents support me and support her.
Right. No, thanks, Amani. So some of it overlaps, and especially when you're parenting of a child at home, that's going to probably be the most right in the middle. I would say when Eddie was reading my bio, I realized I have to update my bio. My boys are now young adults and they're out of the home, so they're actually not in the first circle anymore for me. They've been bumped, and they're in the second circle. Okay, great. Any other comments or observations? All right. So I want to pick up on something, Eddie mentioned that it lines up, like what we have here, it seems to line up what's over there. And then the other question is, do we think, if we're really going to think about racism and dismantling racism, are they achievable with these models of community and this model of this kind of coming from the inside out? What might be a challenge with that, if we're trying to really take on racism? Some of it really depends. I'll tell you that, like, what can happen is, and what often a lot of groups we work with are, we work with all kinds of groups, whether, sometimes they're all people, Jews of color groups, people of color groups, sometimes they're affinity white spaces, different kind of things.
Robert David, you have a in the chat.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I'm not seeing that. Yeah, go ahead and read it, Yehudah.
Yair says maybe that we might not support communities outside our group.
So if you're, thanks, Yehudah. So that's like, right. So if we have, right, you have your group, and your group is going to be in the innermost circle, then you're going to run into a problem because of these hierarchies, which are really natural. Rambam is pointing to that, and this obligation statement is pointing to it, that it's very human and very natural to have a hierarchy of care based on who's in closest, your group or your family, whatever. While that is like can function well in a lot of ways, once that gets put into a racialized society where there's racial inequity, and like the society we live in here, where you have Black and Indigenous people at the bottom of where care goes, concrete time and effort and care goes, and people who are racialized as white, European, where most care goes. If you're in a situation where you're in a more European background, white background, and those are the people most close into you, and the whole emphasis is on caring for those who are in closest, then there's no way that we're ever going to upend this hierarchy of care, because we're always going to care for those who are in most close to us. And our whole, as people know, study systemic racism, they know that this United States society was set up, particularly in the 20th century, to really reinforce segregation around housing, and particularly around housing, neighborhoods where people live and all that. And so it reinforces that sense of being with your own group and not being able to actually go outside. And again, we're not going to upend racial inequities in the society with a system. And I'll just tell you, the community obligation statement, the reveal is that was written by Jean-Louis Le Pen of the xenophobic and anti-Semitic party in France, who wrote that. And we put it in conversation with Rambam to just say that, yes, this is a legitimate thing to have a hierarchy of care, as Rambam shows us, and it could also get really distorted, to actually reinforce hatred of the other. And so with that, we have a problem, and we have to really challenge that and really face that these hierarchies of care are not going to get us out of the situation of racism. So with that, I want to hand it over to Yehudah to talk about how we approach this and what our response is. And in that, I think we're going to see some ways that we can actually balance the dual challenges of anti-Semitism and racism. You want me to keep this up or take it down?
Sure, you keep it up. I think also Dr. Mani has something to add.
Yes, I also was thinking about the universe of obligation and how mostly people showed up on them and not mostly systems showed up there. Like I did put my clients as a place that gets a lot of tending, and that can be somewhat structural. But if I look at the universe of obligations, it's hard to make concrete the way in which I care for systems that either liberatory systems that I'm working on building, or systems that are keeping us separate from one another or out of alignment with one another or out of alignment with solidarity that I'm working against. So the people showed up, but not the systems.
Yeah, thanks for naming that. sometimes I tell people, you know, if most of your time goes to Instagram, put Instagram, right? And that being also part of the system of somewhat distraction from liberatory practice. And I just want to add to what all that Rabbi David already taught us, that this setup of a hierarchy of care also traps those of us that are targeted by anti-Blackness, right? We can end up reinforcing racist hierarchies of power and value through, as Dr. Mani just said, through our jobs itself, right? If our jobs, I don't know who your clients are, right, Dr. Mani per se, right? But through our jobs, so much of our time and energy just to survive can go to, because of the system and the setup of the system that prioritizes most of the care being put to those of European descent, those that are racialized as white, right? So this is something that all of us depend, no matter how you're racialized, we can get caught up in. Now, if you scroll, you scroll to the graphic, what do we do with this? How do we actually upend this racist hierarchy of that is reinforced through our hierarchy of care, and also maintain our commitment to disrupting other forms of oppression, of harm as well, including anti-Semitism? Valerie Kaur, she's a Sikh activist. She has a really brilliant framework of how to move from a hierarchy to a more horizontal approach to care. She talks about love for self, love for others, love for opponents. And we took that framework and reworked it to a balance of care, care not love, because that comes with so many associations and we don't want people to be confused, right? When she's talking about love, she's not talking about the feelings that we often associate with love. She's talking about the labor of love. That's why we talk about care. She's talking about concrete acts of help and nurture. So, for example, if you prioritize your health over your job, over your career, that's a concrete act of care for self. If you're out to brunch and your friend makes a casual racist joke just for some laughs, and you actually step into discomfort and say, that's actually not aligned with our values, I'm not here for that. That's a concrete act of care for somebody else, for other, right? And we actually like to use the word fellow because we don't want to continue to other, even in our attempts to bring care to those that are outside of ourselves, or our communal self, if you will, right? I'll say even tochacha, rebuke, is a form of care when done with compassion, right? And that could be applied to care for opponent. And to be clear, right, I say that just to be clear that when we say care, we're not talking about niceness. People oftentimes often also get confused with this word care, right? Because it feels like coddling, right? We're not necessarily talking about niceness, we're talking about nurture. In fact, we like to use the definition that the late author Bell Hooks uses for her definition of love in her book All About Love. She's riffing off of M. Scott Peck. She says, action we take to nurture our own or another's mind, body, or soul. That's what we mean when we say care. Action we take to nurture our own or another's mind, body, or soul. And sometimes that can be tochacha, that can be correction, right? I wouldn't be my best self if I didn't have my elders and others around me that pulled me up in moments when I wasn't acting in alignment with my values, right? And so what CORE is really offering us is that if we can come into balance of care for self, the communal self, care for fellows, in our case, when disrupting anti-Blackness, that we put those targeted by anti-Blackness in the domain of fellow. But the domain of fellow can be, you can use this framework for anybody, any group that is targeted by an oppressive system. So we can balance care for self, care for fellow, anybody else outside of yourself that's targeted by oppression, care for opponent. We can bring that into balance. We can disrupt the hierarchy of care that reinforces oppressive harm and hierarchies of power and value, And now our output of energy and resources can actually be revolutionary. Yeah. Now, you may be with us. This is a somewhat agitational framework. You might be with us on the care for self and the communal self, care for fellow. You might be, okay, what is this opponent domain? I'm not really rocking with that yet. Okay. Now, when we say opponents, we really simply mean those who oppose your efforts of justice, those who are in somewhat ideological opposition to you. It could extend to far out those who are in more active opposition as well, but we're really we're not really pushing for that at the outset, right? What we mean by this is for you to care for those within your community that is in opposition to you and to your efforts of justice. And what that points to is that sometimes folks who are in the domain of fellow can shift into a domain of opponent for a time, right? It's somewhat dynamic, right? The domain of opponent can include family members, friends, colleagues, your neighbors, right? And so as core season, as we see it as well, if we're going to not if we're going to be able to actually bring healing to our communities, disrupt oppressive harm, subvert this hierarchy of care that reifies hierarchies of power and value that are oppressive, that care for opponents is needed too. And we see this affirmation in Shemot as well in Exodus, that Hashem really commands us, the Creator really commands us to say, you need to care for your enemies in the community as well. If your enemy's farm animal is fallen down and languishing on the road, you have the obligation to take that farm animal back, right? And so that is an indication of the type of society that we're obligated to be holy and in alignment with Torah values. Seeing some things here in the chat. Okay, great. And we'll open it up in a moment for a conversation and some questions. Did a quick scan. Thanks, Mitch. A couple more points to make about this balance of care framework that we're offering here. When we say balance, we don't mean equality, but we mean equity, right? Unequal inputs for equal outcomes. Okay, so at any point in time where there's a group of people that is under attack, under oppression, and not enough care is going to that targeted group of oppression, for a time, we're going to have to expend more of our energy and resources to that group, more of our care, our nurture to that group, to bring it back into balance with everybody else, right? So take my hands as a scale, right? For example, okay, those targeted by anti-Blackness are on this side. We don't get enough care in society writ large, okay? On this side are other people. Let's just say, most of all, white Christian men. They get some of the most care put to them in society. Now, looking at this unbalanced scale, and you went the equal route and said, okay, at this point, let's balance it out. Let's give everybody the same amount of care. Well, the scales will never actually come into balance, right? You just be giving the same. For a time, you have to put more of your energy, more of your nurture and resources to the side that's been unbalanced, that's been unequal, for it to actually come into balance. Okay, I should have raised my hand up like that. Okay. So in this way, the balance of care is dynamic, and that dynamic nature also extends to our shifting proximity to power and again, shifting moments in time where different groups have experiencing various heightened moments of being targeted by oppression. What do I mean by that? again, as a Black man in the US, okay, I have to actually extend a lot of care to myself and the communal self for my output of energy and resources to be bringing more healing to myself and to communities, to be subverting racist hierarchies of power and value. A Black woman, on the other hand, who is targeted by both racism and sexism, has to extend even more care to herself and the communal self, right? Because she's not just targeted by racism as I am, but also is targeted by sexism. Y'all with me? That making sense, right? So in that way, it is dynamic and is really you dependent on your unique makeup of identities, right? It's not everyone's balance of care is going to look different depending on who you are and your shifting proximity to power on the context that you're in and the moment of time that we're in whatever's happening in the world, okay? And so this is what brings us to, as well, to, I think, this moment that we're in of heightened anti-Semitism as well, right? A year ago, I think the Jewish community was in a different place writ large, right? The amount of care that was needed to be extended to the Jewish community but from the rest of society wouldn't have been as much, right? Because we weren't experiencing the level of anti-Semitism that we are today. Yes. And so in this moment, it is appropriate that there's a higher investment of care, of nurture from ourselves and from other people to maintain our balance of care within society. Now, the challenging piece of all of this is that as we constantly shift our care, right, to invest care in different groups, in ourselves, the communal self, or any other group that is targeted by oppressive harm, as we do that, it cannot be at the expense of the harm of another group. And that's really the rub, because oftentimes, as we pull in more care to the self or the communal self or to another group, it is at the expense of the harm of others, right? And that's what we're seeing right now as well. You know, we saw in the Jewish community, we've been experiencing in the Jewish community, again, rightfully so, a pull in, an extension of investment of more care to Jews in this moment of heightened anti-Semitism. Unfortunately, however, that has come at the expense of the harm of our investment in racial justice, right? We've, in many contexts, left that on the floor. We said, well, we don't have capacity for that. We don't have time for that. We can't continue to invest in that, right? And so what this framework is agitating us to do is to say, well, yes, and you can care for self and the communal self, and we still have to maintain our obligation to care for fellows, particularly in this case, those targeted by anti-Blackness. Now, of course, this is all very challenging. This is all very difficult to do. And so that's why you see in the center of the framework, we have the hay with the chipchuk, which represents the word Hashem. And it's another evolution on Valerie Kaur's revolutionary love framework that we've added the role of the spiritual. And she's, of course, very spiritual as well. She just doesn't put into the framework. She leverages the spiritual, her spiritual tradition as well in her work, Revolutionary Love. But we're putting Hashem in the center of the balance of care to say that we need Hashem to be able to be accountable to values greater than ourselves and each other, to help us build awareness of the power that we wield, and to build our muscle, right? And this is where Mussar practice comes in as well, to actually have the strength to do this very challenging task of balancing our care in an equitable manner such that we could bring more healing to our communities and really subvert and challenge oppressive dynamics of harm. So just want to see, Rabbi David, if you have anything else to add here. And we also want to open it up for any questions and other comments.
Yeah, that was great, Yehudah. Thanks a lot. No, I mean, I really think I want to see some of the chat here, just seeing it, but just that, love to hear from folks and really think this through of how the balance of care can help us in this moment, because we've been seeing it in our own organization. I know in the broader field that there's been this pullback from both funding and also just engagement in racial justice work, as the community has rightly needed to focus Jewish community on Israel, on fighting anti-Semitism, but it seems like it's coming at a cost, and also that racial justice is not an external issue to the Jewish community. We're a diverse community, and we need to be fighting racism within our own community. So it's really striking us that that's been challenging, this thing, and that this framework may be helpful. So that was great, Yehuda, and yeah, just love to hear. I want to see some of the chat stuff in the chat, or if there's folks have comments about this.
Yeah, thanks, Rabbi David. And I just want to affirm, Mitch, what you're offering about respecting the, as you put it, godliness or holiness of each person. I really do think that the soul trait, the midah of kavod, is so important. It's essential to what we're bringing to the balance of care. Really recognizing that each and every person in his B'Tselem Elohim is created in the image of Hashem, and that if we were actually able to not just intellectually believe that, but to behave that way, then we would all be in a balance of care, right? And I think that the challenge is that the conditioning and the traps that we are set up in, we feel like we have to choose who gets to be treated as B'Tselem Elohim, who doesn't, right? And our behaviors oftentimes don't align with what we actually hold to be true, right? And so that's, I think, where the spiritual practice comes in, right? We offer this balance of care, but we know that we don't shift into this balance of care just by thinking and talking about it, right? We pair it with practice because we understand that that's necessary as well.
Yeah. I'm wondering, Yair, if you'd be willing to come off mute and just say a little more about what you're writing there. And if you're pulled away at the moment because of safety, I may be safe. I want to make sure you're safe. I'm not sure if you're talking about this exact moment or not. Okay, maybe not. Not able to come off mute now. Oh, okay. All right. Thanks here. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I could speak to that a little bit. I think I really appreciate you naming that, right? Of feeling like you cannot show up. What I'm getting from that, and you could correct me if I'm wrong in the chat, Yair, right? But what I'm gathering from that is a sense of not being able to show up for others in this moment, or for fellows, perhaps, because of a perceived sense of a threat to your safety, right? And that's very real, right? And I think there's actual threats to our safety, as well as a heightened, because of the ways in which fear is being really kicked up in our communities and around, right? So there's both the real threat, and then there's also the heightened perceived threats, right? And all of that is in service of keeping us divided, right? And not actually talking to each other, and not really extending care for each other, right? And I think that in those instances where you feel that sense of threat to your own safety, my question to you is, what self-care do you need to be able to be to come back and give extended, or those fellows have shifted into of opponents, right? But what is the self-care that you need really into yourself and fortify you to move into care for fellows? Because I think if we can do that, then we'll find care coming back to us from other communities as well.
Yeah, I'll just add to that, Yehuda, piece too, about we know about in trauma that people get much more concrete thinking when a trauma response is evoked of us and them, and things are either this or that, and it gets very binary. And and so I think I would add what Yehuda is saying, like the more we can also regulate ourselves and be able to kind of bring down the intensity of the fear that we may be feeling in any way, that actually allows a more spaciousness to be able to see complexity and see how things maybe are not as binary as we might have once seen them. And that's a very internal process to be able to work with oneself and the way one's dysregulated.
I was also thinking about the ways in which that is replicated in our physiology, right? That when we are experiencing a trauma response, for example, that the ear canal, the ear system is trained to hear high and low and not middle. Right? That we can hear we can hear danger, essentially. We tune more acutely, our bodies tune more acutely into that danger zone, and the things that are in the middle that are not part of the binary, physiologically our ears do not perceive them as strongly. And I think that parallels some of the kind of psycho-emotional stuff. Like the middle seems scary. I really need to attune to the edges in case there is some information for me there, and the middle not so much. And the other thing I was thinking about when you were talking earlier, Yehudah, was the idea of markedness, the sociological idea of markedness, which is the external markings that denote non-normativity, right? So, that might include a walking cane for somebody who is blind as an external sociological other. If for me, it always includes my skin color and the shape of my body, the aspects of my body. For people who wear kippot in our community or who wear tzitzit, that is a markedness that other people are not experiencing. And I think that when I think about Yair's comment around safety, I think about the many, many people who, because they are marked in different ways, are experiencing lack of safety. In fact, probably there are more of us than there are of the quote unquote normative people. If we take all of the axes of identity and think about them, who are actually having that same struggle around safety. And what it might mean for the people who have been deemed not normative and are marked in that way, to be together and say, this isn't okay for any of us who have been marked as other, and that the safety of all of us that isn't traditionally preserved is something we all want to be looking at and fighting for one another together.
Yeah, thanks so much for that. I really resonate with that a lot, and that to that point that you made. Thank you for sharing about that sociological, the markedness piece, and the other piece I really resonate with is the sense that many people feel like they're the most targeted in this moment, that they're experiencing a heightened a moment of targeted oppression and harm, right? And so what do you have? That's a really challenging dynamic to be in, right? What do you do with that? And how do you do that? And I think that part of that is that we have to, despite our fear, really push the boundaries of where we belong and who we can care for. And as we do that, right, we both signal to ourselves and to each other that belonging and safety isn't limited, and care isn't limited, right, to just ourselves and our in-group, right? And the inclination, a very understandable and fair inclination, is to really pull in tight. But actually, safety and belonging isn't guaranteed there either. Yeah. And so in the long run, we need to continue to push out and push the boundaries of care such that we can expand our circles of care, not be so limited as what we saw in our universe of obligation.
I love that, Yehudah. If I can jump in to continue the discussion here, and maybe Dr. Imani also has some insights on this. But is there also a battle of a biological sense of fight or flight that is within a lot of marginalized communities who are experiencing heavy responses of trauma from I know, folks who I know personally who are descendants of Holocaust survivors, who this for them is very real, and it's almost in their DNA. For me, as a migrant and an undocumented person who fled violence, I fled the cartels, I fled violence in my own native place. For me, seeing rise of use of weapons to hurt people, that for me puts me in a fight or flight stance where I'm no longer even considering, speaking to other folks who are even friends or foe. I'm just thinking about my own safety, and I'm wondering how we can even think about bridging that gap to those folks who are just deeply in that preservation mode and sustainably, honestly, sorry, sustainably is not the right word, but honestly, I hear them and I feel them when I speak to folks who are Holocaust survivors, and they do see what's happening in the world. They do see what's going on right now. And I see their descendants have that deep fear embedded into their DNA. And I think it's something very difficult to just go past into a point of community. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
My thoughts, but just want to make space for anybody else.
I would just say I think Eddie, you're like nailing it. I think you're really putting your finger right on like such a big piece of the issue that we're dealing with. And I see Yair's question as well of have we witnessed other communities care coming towards the Jewish community, and as an Israeli, not like really the lack of compassion. There's a lot of that, which just reinforces the trauma that's there. So.
In reference to that, I was
Yeah,
thinking
please.
about the variety of responses that Holocaust survivors have had, a real spectrum of responses. And the researcher in me is like, well, what is the interpretation that people having this response have, having had the same experience as those people who are having a different response? What is it about? So it's not the trauma itself, right? Like Resmaa Menakem says, trauma is experiencing too much, too fast, too soon, without enough reparative or restorative in between, right? So like, is it the reparative restorative that some people are experiencing that is the variable that accounts for divergence or difference among the group of people who are experiencing that? Who are having, they're having different responses. And the other piece I was thinking about in reference to Yair's comment in the chat is that one of the ways that anti-Semitism, I understand anti-Semitism to work, is as a system that scapegoats, right, for at times of unrest when liberatory movements are making headway as a way to divide and conquer. That is not happening. That's not instigated by us as Jews, but it's operationalized so that as we begin to move forward, we start retracting. And then we can't connect because we are really in self-preservation, and care does need to be turned inwards for those who are in experiencing unsafety or trying to navigate experiencing feelings of unsafety. And so it's, but I think for me, it's like it's about not staying in that place. It's about like venturing out and seeing and knowing or hearing from people who are experiencing care toward whatever group is feeling marginalized, subjugated, endangered.
Yeah, I love what you're offering, Dr. Mani, and very much so. I think that is at least within the balance of care framework, that is the X factor, is around the trauma piece that Eddie is raising, is the self-care piece, right? Were you able to actually enough of care into yourself to be able to heal, such that you can move out of this trauma response mode, right? And you can't do that, then you kind of just continue to swim in the trauma, right? And are able to move outwards, right? And the long-term strategy, as I understand it, is that safety of tribalism only takes you so far, right? We actually, I love what you put about John Powell getting to a larger we, right? We want to be a part of the larger we, right? We want to, right? We want to not just care for ourselves on a point of, also just on a point of principle, right? Of what we're obligated to in Torah, I think, as Jews, right? It's not just about us, right? But it's not at the expense of us either. And so that's what the balance of care really invites us and agitates us into.
There's been some really good pieces I've seen, critique of the left, from the left itself, around the scapegoating and around kind of the just kind of making Israel or making Jews like the worst thing ever in the world, or all that, and that's not helpful to anyone. And these critiques are just saying that is actually preventing us, as Dr. Mani was just saying, breaks up movements for liberation. That is breaking up. Unless Jews and Israel's a Jewish state, it's a state like every state has its problems, has its good things. But unless Jews are really seen as part of that big picture of the we, of the collective we, and Israel seen as the collective we as part of the collective nations, we're not really going to get there. So, we have the balance care framework, and we think about it, and we teach this mostly with Jews. So we're really teaching how to balance our self-care as Jews with, care for fellow and all that. But everyone else needs to do this too, and think about where Jews are fellow and dealing with oppression. So it's really not, it's interlocking of the responsibility between different groups around this. You had any last comments? I think we're about almost at time here to wrap up. Yeah, good. Okay. All right. Well, there's a whole other part of this, which is actually the Mussar piece, which is then how we move into practice. And as you had said, we put Hashem in the middle because we need Hashem to do this work, and we need to really develop our kelim, our tools, and our vessel to be able to be Ovdei Hashem, to walk in the path of Hashem and do the work. And Mussar is the primary tool we use for doing that, which is a discipline, spiritual discipline of aligning our souls with our behavior and to try to live in balance of care. So we invite you to check us out, kirva.org. See, we run different courses where we teach this around the country. I invite you to join that if you'd like. And another time we could perhaps offer the Mussar piece as well. Eddie, thanks for having us.
No, thank you both. I appreciate it. As always, your wisdom is just so beautiful, and we're able to have these conversations. I think that this is an important piece of dialogue that's just really missing in our communities right now. Being able to step into these types of dialogue where a lot of us are maybe a little bit uncomfortable. A lot of us are learning on how to build our inner circle that allows for love to not just stay in a circle, but to be able to reach other places, right? And I really appreciate the wisdom that's coming out of Kirva and all the amazing work that both Yehudah and Rabbi David here are presenting. Make sure you check them out. Make sure you follow.
You want to include Dr. Amani here as well, who's been such
Dr.
a great
Amani, yeah. Who has just been phenomenal at entering and providing such beautiful wisdom here. So I appreciate all of you for your time. Thank you so much for such a great class and learning and dialogue. We appreciate you. Thank you so much for tuning in. Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.